So what we have for you guys today is a distillation of different conversations we've had with our customers, with our prospects. We've collected some trends and challenges that we've seen sort of in the market, and then some strategies and tactics that we've seen people use to effectively solve these problems. We're hoping that you can take away and use in the context of your own business, right? So we've prepared these examples in Streamline to sort of visualize them and breathe life into them. But at the same time, they've come from different industries, different business maturity, different geography. I'm sure you guys know, culture plays a large part in buying habits. I think it's near Lunar New Year. So do take them with a grain of salt and evaluate them in the context of your own business and your own strengths and weaknesses, right? So we're hoping that by sharing these observations with you, you can take away a couple of things you can do differently. And if you have open-ended questions about how you foresee these things being applied in your own business, or would be interested in a deeper conversation about applying these, we would be more than happy to continue the conversation in a more personal format. So Josh, if you wouldn't mind opening up the first poll, and we can see where we'll take the webinar next.
Perfect. Done.
Excellent. So I have a choice here. I think it's you guys can only pick one, but we've built in lots of time for Q&A, so hopefully we should get through all three, and then still have time for questions at the end. So while that's happening in the background, a little bit of introduction. So for those on the call that aren't our customers or our partners, good to meet you. My name is Malcolm. I'm head of business development here at Streamline. I'll be conducting the webinar today. My background is in management consulting. I started off doing door-to-door, and I've always loved speaking to people, learning new things, but I figured I could do the same thing, help people, but from the comfort of inside. And now I don't have to go out in the Canadian winter. So I worked mostly in Southeast Asia doing business strategy and applied data analytics for different industries. So some banking, some oil and gas, some airlining. And I was having many of the direct conversations that some of these trends have been pulled from with consultant partners, manufacturers, distributors, retailers that have informed our findings that we're going to share with you today. And I saw on the topic of consultants, and I saw them in the LinkedIn sign up too, in case you're evaluating the relevance of Streamline for projects or clients. So a little bit about us, we partner with manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, and supply chain consultants to make AI and machine learning accessible for businesses of any size, right? When doing supply chain planning. So our CEO Alex brought together partners who have experience in, very large ex-Fortune 500 supply chain executives who understand the business, plus some developers, very experienced developers from Google and Facebook, to create the demand and inventory planning software Streamline. So we're the only company to use dynamic simulation for this purpose. And our goal is to deliver the same power and flexibility as the big box solutions without having to have the GDP of a small country in budget and hire 20 people with a data science degree, right? So if you're curious about anything we do today or would be interested on our perspective, feel free to reach out to the team. We would be happy to have a conversation in a more detailed format. So we'll go over some trends, and then I'll have a look at the survey results. So this will be sort of the intro or the bedrock. Without further ado, we've collected the following trends from different conversations we've had with our prospects and clients. And there seems to be a cliche that's apt here, which is the only predictable thing here is a lack of predictability, right? If we look back at 2020, that's when the pandemic or the lockdown started. I guess the pandemic would have started earlier. And China closed down. In 2021, we had the Suez Canal being blocked. This year, we had the war in Ukraine. China's opened back up despite the prevalence of COVID. So, looking forward, we have things like the looming financial uncertainty in the markets and inflation in the background. The larger message I take away is there have been and always will be something to complicate the already difficult job of planning accurately and efficiently, right? And that's to say, that's only talking about external complications so far, right? So our customer expectations are inflating. Everybody wants the Amazon experience. I want to press one button to order my product. I want it delivered yesterday, and it has to have a net carbon zero footprint. And you're supposed to deliver all of that while managing a team that works from home. So wow, good S&OP has never been more difficult and more complicated and more necessary, right? And despite all this, we see great opportunity despite the challenges. So, diamonds are made under pressure. As big trees fall in the forest, there's new light that hits the forest floor. And so for the fast growing challenger businesses that can navigate these challenges in a better, more efficient way, they have the chance to distinguish themselves, exceed their customers in inflating expectations, and carve out a niche for themselves, or maybe eat away at the market share that others are hoarding in the market. So I'm having a look at the poll results now, and it looks like topic B is oh no, actually it's topic C. It's very close. So it looks like we'll do CAB. And so I'll go to the slide that covers, I think it was data disruption. So here we go. So dealing with data disruption, some strategies and tactics. Dealing with disruption, already a common problem pre-2020, I would say is becoming more common as businesses digitize and start to collect data, as well as deal with the ever-growing complexity of business digitalization, changing and dealing with these supply shocks in the background. So we suggest a simple 3-step model to help identify unhelpful data, diagnose the cause of the disruptions, and then choose a course correction, right? So so we have, something from more mild to extreme or simple to complex. Unexpected events, like you see on the left there under causes, any of these can cause problems with your data that render it no longer helpful for predicting the future. So it could be as simple as, atypical as black swan events like COVID-19 or the Suez Canal. It could be as simple as, somebody's miscounted and now the numbers are wrong. How do we fix that? Regardless, the key is to identify the fact that past data is no longer helpful, and then move forward into, now we know the problem, how are we going to deal with it, right? So often the simplest and best way to deal with data disruptions is to ignore them, right? In the context of more statistical models, we can just say, we'll exclude this from everything as complex as, dynamic simulation to a simple moving average, because it doesn't represent what we had going on. We were just stocked out due to COVID, or, the COVID period is more or less over, or there's Lunar New Year, or whatever it happens to be. Another approach is to manually edit the past data. You want to be careful with this because it's not always possible or appropriate. I know that some of your friends in accounting might come after you if you change some data in SAP. So and you also want to be careful of your motives here. You don't want to fit data to a beautiful model. You want to accurately predict the future. So don't get the two motives confused. And of course, rule-based exceptions, so taking the outlier idea and applying it in a systematic way. So for example, between X and Y periods, we had COVID disruption, or maybe it's rule-based, maybe it only affected a certain portion of the item tree or our SKUs, or maybe they only were affected by our suppliers in a particular geography, such as China. And then now we're getting into realizing that something is permanently changed about your business, right? Suddenly the old way of doing things is no longer relevant. Do we have to take a hard look? And at the beginning, I would say, do basically a pilot project that's manual, keep it small and scale it down. There is a logical fallacy in there. So not everything that is scaled down works at a big scale, but it's certainly easier to test, and you could try a couple of SKUs. But ultimately, if you have to, revising your overall forecast strategy might be the necessary and best thing to do, right?
Malcolm, we're getting a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So what about methods for planning for larger businesses? So 500 plus SKUs, is it reasonable or even possible to do manual demand planning in this case?
So that's an interesting question, and sort of likens back to what I said earlier. Should you scale manual processes? I would say some of these things are easier to do, right? You want to, we talked about digitalization earlier, and you want to lean on that to make certain things possible that weren't before. I would also say that you really want to focus your attention where it's best used, right? So for manual forecasting, if you're, for example, doing an ABC analysis, you want to focus your analysis on the A products. And so if you have 500 SKUs, maybe that narrows your work down to 20% of what it used to be. So what is that? 100 SKUs. That's a huge lift, and it didn't require you going SKU by SKU, right? Also, any automation or digitalization here will allow you to keep track of what's going on in your business and measure where your impact will be. So I would say everyone's seen the spreadsheet that has 60 columns and 400 rows, right? So if you're doing that, no, it's simply not possible. You need something more scalable and robust, but you can make even manual things much easier to do just by asking yourself the question, what should I plan for first? What are my highest impact things? So you want to maximize your A products, you want to minimize your C products, and then the dead space in between will have to sort itself out, right? It's a great question. So let's move into a specific example in Streamline. So adapting a demand inventory plan. So there are a couple of things you can do right off the bat. So here is Streamline. I've loaded a little bit of data. So you want to hit update data. Of course, everybody wants to be working off the same spreadsheet, right? You want everyone singing off the same sheet music. So for rule-based exceptions, you can go back and select the SKU that you've identified a disruption for and say, okay, it looks like here we have 2 periods of 0 sales. We know based on our diagnosis. So this is the data. We say what happened, and we come to the realization it's something that isn't representative of the future. Maybe we had some stockouts due to COVID disruption, but it isn't predictive of future demand. So we can simply go to that place and exclude those as outliers and recalculate the model and then look at how the demand plan has changed over time. Right? You could do the same thing with a rule-based exception. If you decide a whole set of dates because of our lead times is what's the word? Invalid, then you can do that as well. Or you could, select an entire product tree that was affected the same way and apply the exceptions from the top-down level as well. And if necessary, you can always manually edit your forecast. So you could say, okay, we fixed the data in the back, but I'm still not happy with the forecast now because we believe things have changed about our business. We think we'll do better or worse, and you can apply a rules-based transformation that just says, you know what, I think our sales guys are very optimistic, as they always are. They're telling us we're going to do 1.5. Let's give it to them, and we'll have these numbers as a means of keeping them honest later, right? So that is a basic example of a couple of statistical techniques that you can use to adapt a demand and inventory plan disrupted by COVID. You can also do the same thing from the inventory side. So, having a look at your replenishment plan, you can say, okay, well, based on the way that we're doing our business, what if these other variables change? We can edit them and see what the impacts will be. So I think the next one was supplier unpredictability. So before I move on, I'll just quickly give everyone a minute to ask questions about what I just covered. And if not, we can go to supplier unpredictability. So I think this was option A. So chronologically, right, we've developed a demand plan that we like, but as they say, expect the unexpected. I've always found that one difficult to wrap my head around. So I usually prefer something like hope for the best, plan for the worst, and then add some space in for things you didn't think of, right? Because humans are notoriously bad at, for example, estimating how long things will take. So the idea remains the same, which is to squeeze as much risk as possible out of the supply chains and open up future resources to grab opportunities. Here at Streamline, one of the things I've learned over having conversations is the essence of great S&OP is coordination, right? Much like a conductor at an orchestra, clear information between different stakeholders is essential. And that's both internal and external. So departments like sales and operations typically have these, siloed data sources and ways of thinking. Or external, right? You have a way of running your business. Your suppliers have a way of running your business. Planning as a whole is an information-based game. So why not simply ask for more information, share more information, right? And go ahead.
Looks like we got a question in the chat. Let's say we are adding a new store. So can we map like for store for better forecasting.
How do you mean map the store, as in to other stores, or based on maybe we can unmute the participant, they can clarify?
Yep. I've allowed them to talk.
Perfect.
Hi,
Hi, Fahad,
uh,
nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too. If we are adding some store and we have data for like store, like currently we have one store which we think that is to be exact the same store what we are opening, the trend would be the same. So can we add it?
Can we, and so, sorry, are you talking about a store or a specific type,
Yeah,
set of products?
like
And you,
new product or new store, and we know the trend would be the same as of the current store or the product. So can we give that store for the better forecast?
yeah, absolutely. So are you referring to in Streamline or in general, sort of strategically?
If I am asking about the streamline. Can we
Okay.
add? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things, so it depends on exactly what your use case is, and so maybe we should have a chat after. But for example, if I was to go back into Streamline, I can do two things, and this will actually come up later in the webinar. I think it was option C. Or sorry, option B that we'll cover next. But you can borrow seasonality from different SKUs. So if you know, for example, the demand for concrete blocks will be similar to nails, and you can borrow the seasonality for another to provide a baseline for your future demand forecast, right? So the two are related to construction. Maybe you know that that is a representative idea. Another way is if you have a store, an entirely separate location with the same products, you can borrow the products for that store and say, here's our baseline for demand based on the store, adjusted for, geographical differences like population. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. And we'll get into showing exactly that. One of the things, exactly one of the things you mentioned there in a second. So great question. So we were talking about collaborating with suppliers. So planning is an information game. Why not get more information, from your suppliers, for example, right? We often find this is an underutilized resource. People order from their suppliers. When was the last time you guys had a conversation with them, right? Ask them about how they could, how you could make their lives easier by changing things that aren't of value as to you. We'll give a specific example later. And one of the simplest ways to improve visibility and get ahead of issues and maybe even put yourself in a better negotiating position, excuse me, a better negotiating position is to have these conversations. So key questions in this area are things like, what do our suppliers know about our operations already? What do we know about theirs? What information is safe to share with them, given perhaps their relationship to your competitors, right? Semiconductors is a small industry. And how can I involve them in our processes? What is the earliest I can involve them in our processes such that they acquire this information efficiently, organically, they can decide to do with it things that I will benefit from, right? And so they work for you, but it's in your interest to make their lives as easy as possible. And so another one is, being predictable to your suppliers too. So it works the other way. You open that set of dialogue and you share information with them. So we'll go into a specific example later. So developing a risk management plan. So as we said before, expect the unexpected. What can we do in advance to prepare for the unexpected? And once it happened, how do we build in as much flexibility and adaptability such that we have as much resources available, we minimize the impact of negative events, and therefore have as much resources as possible available to take advantage of opportunities as they arise. So, for example, linking together with the previous point, by having multiple suppliers for key components. So you've identified what are the key things in our supply chain we simply cannot continue without, right? What are business continuity critical? And you can reduce your dependence on any single supplier and simultaneously put yourself in a better negotiation position in terms of maybe prioritized orders or pricing or specialized deals. And leveraging sort of the next point as a great segue into digitalization and automation, create a risk-free environment. right? Do some sandboxing and say, what happens if our critical component lead times double? What happens if our supplier just becomes inconsistent? What if they go out of business, right? How bad will it get? And is the risk and the probability of that risk occurring significant enough that resources should be devoted towards preventing it, or at least mitigating it? And last but not least, of course, having a multi-layered risk management plan. I almost skipped that. So that's important because there can be things that there can be different problems that nullify different parts of your preparation. So you can have multiple suppliers for nails, for example. But if the steel industry as a whole takes a hit, then it would have been better to stockpile nails instead of diversifying your supplier. So assess your risks, develop a plan that addresses those risks as best you can. And then last but not least, let the machines do what the machines are good at, keeping track of endless items in a spreadsheet, doing incredibly repetitive, monotonous number crunching. Let the humans do what the humans are good at, right? Imagining new possible situations, asking great questions such as why, getting creative and testing what if scenarios, reframing the problem as a whole, the fun part of supply chain optimization, right? And as a business,
Got a question in the chat, Malcolm.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
How should we identify the best processes to automate? And what if we don't have the resources to digitize the business now? What can we do in the meantime?
So that's a tough question. I would say that I would rephrase actually to what's the cost of not digitizing, right? So there's typically a point in a business's maturity where it makes more sense to use Excel, and then much less sense to use Excel, right? It's free, it's powerful, right? The whole financial system is basically held up by it for good reason. It's just that at a certain point, for example, if you're trying to do simulation of future events, right? God forbid you have a 60 column, 400 row spreadsheet. And someone forgets to add a zero, right? That is days worth of analysis that is simply no longer useful, right? So I would say, in addition to the basics like return on investment and competitive advantage and scalability, security and privacy, as a business owner, you might be thinking about whether or not digitization leads to a loss of employment, right? And so you want to measure and standardize your processes so you can see what is the lift I would get out of something, this piece of automation or this piece of digitalization, and then which processes. I would say the same thing, right? So I'll give an example. A furniture customer of ours came to us, and their original ask was to do with overstock, right? They were stockpiling all these chairs in a warehouse, and they wanted to better predict demand so that they would have less inventory doing nothing, right? Burning a hole in their pockets. But we discovered that just by connecting their ERP to their Excel spreadsheet, we could reduce a job that took them a day and a half to a couple of seconds. So that was value they weren't looking for, but value that was there to be collected. Tough to say. Tough to say exactly what each and every business should do, but that's the kind of thinking that leads to value.
Perfect. Second question. So to establish a good scenario or what if tool, what is the suggested amount of sampling is used to get this scenario to provide a good picture? Example, 1 or 2 year samplings.
Great question. And I think, this is a question more about statistics than it is supply chain. But for example, Streamline's engine functions off, I would say, 1 to 2 years of historical data is effective for much more accurate planning. But the truth is, this usually depends on the nature of what you're looking for. So we had a question, I think, in the forums about made to engineer products or made to order products, and it's very tough to predict demand for those. Just because of the nature of what the product tends to be. They tend to be customized, they tend to be low volume, they tend to be sort of contract or supplier based, so it makes more sense to view those on a relationship basis. I would say it also depends on the variable you're looking at when looking at the what if analysis. So what I mean by that is if you're, what do you care about, right? What do you care about? Is it your service levels? That's the thing you're optimizing for, or are you more sort of outcome based? Is it revenue or your stock out or overstock that you're optimizing for, right? Thinking about that determines what tool you should use, how many departments you need to get involved, how complex your model is, and therefore how much data you need to make an adequate statement about that. It's a great question. It's a super complicated question. So maybe one to get specific about. Oh, sorry. I just saw that your company is in the automotive industry. So yeah, if you're talking about specific automotive parts, then the demand and therefore how much data you need on that demand will depend too on the popularity of the car that the part is for. So many things sort of correlated together. And so last but not least, I think we have supplier unpredictability. Last on this topic is supplier unpredictability. So, you've prepared for something to go wrong. So the previous slide was around strategic preparation. Now something has gone wrong. What do you do? What are some tactical things that you can do to, obviously it's not a good time for the business, but show your value as a creative supply chain executive. So some key questions that are very simple, but difficult to answer and important to answer during some kind of crisis is, how bad is it? Can I live with that or can I not? And if not, what should I do and how much of it? Right. So the key thing here is not to panic and get in your own way. So, clear intelligence is the basis of warfare and supply chain planning. And so we recommend changing your ERP. We recommend editing your data as far up in your data stream as you could possibly get it. Right. So typically that's your ERP. So I know people have different opinions about that, but simply put, if you have a tech stack that flows from your ERP, you want to change it as early as possible so you can see the natural consequences of every single one of those falling dominoes as it occurs through the business, right? And this avoids the whole conversation of, where did you get your spreadsheet and whose data is correct and what data is, the one that you started on, discussions that nobody wants to have and nobody has time for, right? So once that is clear, everybody's on the same page about how bad is it, what's the damage? What do you guys care about? What do our KPIs look like in the future? And at that point, you can say, do I have to get out on the phone in front of my customers? Do I have to get extra resources to develop something? Do we have to buy something? Do we have to redo our whole demand forecasting process? Do we have to fix the end of our supply chain because the supplier's dead in the water and they won't get back up anytime soon, right? So a specific example, adapting a replenishment plan based on supplier unpredictability. So if we go back into Streamline, we looked at the demand portion. Let's look at the inventory portion. So I was talking about editing some of these variables. So we can sort by a supplier, filter by the supplier, and say, unfortunately, we know we're contractually obligated to a lead time of 90 days. I'm sorry, they're going to double, right? And there's nothing that we can do about that. It turns out that for this particular line of products, we have a nice healthy overstock that we were burning through anyway. So no big deal, right? No change is necessary. But let's, what if they go out of business, right? Right? How long do we have? What's our sort of runway? And it looks like it depends on the product, but maybe 1, 2, 3, the date in this example is Jan 1st. So, 8 months, something like that, and then we're in trouble. So we have a ticking time bomb and it says that we need to figure out a different way of getting what we need. Is that acceptable? Is there any action necessary? And so, a series of, you can look at the problem a different way. You can say, instead of lead time, you can think of it in terms of, because I know some businesses think in terms of service level or safety stock. So I don't think I have that enabled here. So if I clear my filter and I add ABC analysis, right, I can just have a look at just my top products. So, alluding to the previous question, I have 22 SKUs here in this example, but I only really need to pay attention to maybe the top and the bottom 3, right? What do I have as the setting here? So my ABC analysis is revenue. I know some people look at units sold, so we can do that as well. And so you can see here are my rockstar products. These are the ones I want to focus my attention on. Here are my bad boy products. These are the ones that I want to minimize. They should receive some attention, not in the same way as the rock stars. And it turns out that, yeah, most of my A products are from the same supplier. Is that worth something? Is that worth diversifying, right? And so we can say, okay, our service levels for our top products could probably be high, but the service levels for our bottom ones, they probably don't need to be as high, right? And how does that look in terms of what happens in the future? And asking the real questions, right? If we go over here and say, okay, what is the impact on our finances? We can say, let's run a simulation that says 90 days from now, given current circumstances, what does our situation look like? Right? And say, okay, is this acceptable? Yeah, it looks like right at the end, the tail end, we have this huge spike in overstock, just as our inventory plan would have suggested. Is that acceptable? Is that not? Right? So I'll leave it there for a second, let people ask any questions they have, and then we'll go to the last category we had.
Okay, so got a question in chat. Based on best practice, what is recommended to establish that ABC inventory policy? We have about 15,000 SKUs for FG and 50,000 for raw materials. Volatility is high in this commodity.
Wow, tough question. So the great question, tough question. That's why they pay you the big bucks, right? Some of the defaults I can show you here. So, Streamline has collected sort of these defaults. I'm hoping you can see it based on the way that many businesses have thought. So the philosophy here is power and flexibility, right? But simplicity. So, if you were to buy something like Blue Yonder, you could custom build your own ABC parameters. And something that we do with Streamline is understand exactly how your item tree works and the business thinks about its products, and we can categorize them this way as well. But typical ABC is usually based on these particular variables, and the thresholds I've seen all sorts of different kinds, right? And the only thing consistent is that good ABC analysis logic has some logic behind it. It's sort of a tautology. But if I want to look at the top 70% of my products just because something is special about that 70% for me, or that's how many, for example, SKUs that my people can look at every single planning period, whether that be week or month. And that's just how my resources are divided up. So I draw a line in the sand, and there it is. So the very typical ones I see are revenue, units sold combined, right? So if you're a sort of a growth-based business, then you want to look at that. If you want to look at it from the opposite end, you can look at a cost-based system. So units sold and cost. But either way, I think ultimately you just want to see what, if you have 15,000 SKUs, right? And it depends on how you plan to, sort of what the software is in the background or what your Excel looks like, how much time you have in the day, but you want to develop an ABC analysis that has a clear cutoff for you that says these are the ones that are going to get my attention.
Can you mix two different criteria, like example revenue and volatility?
Absolutely, right? So this is technically as a structure for ABC analysis, you could technically have more. It just becomes a larger grid, but we recommend keeping it as simple as possible. Over-engineered solutions are never good in the long run, and they eat up a ton of computing power. But you can see, unless I've disabled it somehow. Oh yeah, here it is. So you can see that both of these are separate ABC analysis, and then you can look at them together and say, here's a product that fits into both A categories. Here's a product that fits into one A category and one B category, or I should say one B category and one A category, right? And so you can see, here are the best performance in both. Here are the middle of the road ones that are kind of strong in some areas, weak in others, and here are the ones that are neither strong nor weak. Perhaps it's best to just eliminate them. Great question. Any others? And if not, we can move on to the final topic I think we have for today. I was just looking at the time, so I think we're okay for time. New product demand forecasting. So this is a classic one. We have no intelligence, we have no data. How do we leverage that newfangled science stuff now? Right. And so unfortunately, there isn't a silver bullet here, right? It's just hard work. And the first thing that you should do is get in touch with your market, your customers, understand the way they think about this problem, and therefore the way that you should think about this problem. So nothing beats good old market research. And there are just ways to do this in a scalable and data-driven way, right? It's very important to understand. You have to combine two things, right? You have to combine the perspective of having conversations with your prospects to see how you should understand their own survey results, as well as what questions you should ask for the survey. And the survey represents the scalable way of gathering statistically significant data, right? You come up with the hypotheses through the interviews or social media, and you come up with the data and the trends through surveys, right? Another classic one that we see is the Delphi method. That I love that because it comes from the Oracle of Delphi. I'm a huge mythology geek, but that's a fancy way of just saying asking experts in the business what they think, right? Tom's been in the furniture industry for 20 years, and he's got his he knows when the peak seasons are and the off seasons are, and he follows the fact that different woods have, I don't know, different spiritual properties, and he knows what people are thinking, right? And it's time to consult him about what's going on in the market. And then, of course, now once the foundation has been laid, now we can talk about more sort of robust and statistically significant things like analogous forecasting. So using demand patterns for similar items. So similar is the key word here, and you have to make a value judgment. You have to say, is it based on geography? Is it based on similar product type, right? Because you can say, you know, we're going to sell a new sofa, use demand from the previous sofa. That seems logical, but what if the sofa is being sold in a totally different country where people have different ideas about socializing?
Question in the Q&A. So CEO says he has a good finger on the pulse about what and how much to order. How do I convince him that there is a better, different way?
Ooh, wow. So I think that question is more about the change management than it is about stats. But it's a great question. It's tough to say. I would say make the decision as easy as possible. If it's a good decision, right? That'll be part of it. Evaluate whether or not it's a good decision, and then make the decision as easy as possible, right? So involve the CEO as much as possible in the data analysis process, help them understand how it's collected, it's analyzed, it's interpreted. That'll build their confidence. Start small, right? Have a pilot project. You know, it depends on your relationship with the CEO. Do they really trust you, or are you kind of new in the business? Because if they really trust you, you could just build a model and back test it on old data and show here's how much money we would have saved. That's usually compelling. But if there's, you know, not a lot of trust in that relationship yet, you know, start small, make it really easy for them. Make a really clear process, right, and framework for data-driven decision making. You know, scorecards are great here. Roles and responsibilities, RACI matrices, if people are familiar with those. This will mean that not only is the data good, the model good, the decision makers are involved, the project is low risk, but it also means you can do it all again once you get approval, right?
Something else in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Before COVID, market trend is good to use, but now most of the OEM is planning based on the supply constraints that they will have. Example, semiconductors. Is there a source of this information in supply constraint today, or that is not existing now? I guess you mentioned this in the supplier collaboration, but hoping there is a source that can show these patterns.
That is a fantastic question too, right? And so, unfortunately, with respect to very specific industries, often it is, you know, on websites or insider groups, or right, you have to have conversations with people to identify what the resources are you should be looking at. And I would say everyone wants to know, right? Especially like you said, semiconductor industry is very tight right now. There are only a couple of suppliers, and the rare metals that go into it and the way they're manufactured makes them so hard to build and therefore get access to. So I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. I do think sharing information is a start, but I know people are building models based off publicly available data, but I couldn't tell you a specific one for semiconductors. Sorry. It's a great question though. And I'll let you know, Zaldi, if I come across one. Great question though. So what do we have? And updating this baseline. Another alternative to analogous forecasting is top-down forecasting. So for the C products, maybe you don't want to pay attention to them. You can always just slap on a top-down forecasting model instead and be done with it, right? And so I'll give an example of that. If we go back to demand and we've established through whichever means of analysis that, let's say our building materials group is going to be similar data for both. So let's say we have a new product here. You could see concrete blocks has no past data at all. We have different options. We can say, let's do a
Apologize
top-down
for
approach.
interrupting. We got another
No,
question.
go ahead.
To achieve a certain sale, how to calculate optimum required inventory, industry, fashion, retail?
Industry and fashion. Yeah. So this is an interesting question because you sometimes plan backwards, right? You want to look at how much money you need to make. So, I mean, if you don't have software for this is incredibly painful. And there's no way around that. But what I would recommend is, get a robust piece of software and simply change your revenue variable here. So let's say, what does this say? 185 grand. So if I do 500,000, right, then the software will tell you based on your current price of goods and how much revenue you want to make and the volume that you're moving. Here's what your salespeople have to sell, right? It's sort of like a growth-based target, right? And then you hand that to the salespeople and say, make it happen, guys. You're on the hook for this. So that, yeah, and fashion is a key one too because demand changes very, very fast, right? And so it makes more sense to. I think fashion is a great example industry where top-down forecasting makes a lot more sense. And borrowing models between different products, we'll go through that in a second. To save yourselves time, and it's often marketing driven, right? It isn't supply chain constrained the way Zaldi is talking about it, for example, or accessibility constrained. It's we have the clothing raw materials from Bangladesh, right? That now we need to turn them into shirts and get people to buy them, right? Great question. So if, for example, we have a new product that has no sales, we can just do top down, or we can, do top down for the whole market segment. And then what the software should do is recalculate. I think I've done something wrong, but that's okay. Recalculate everything using an average. So, typically we do bottom up, but you could do top down as well. And then one of the things that you can also do is just borrow a model. So for example, we have seasonality patterns here. So Streamline will auto calculate one. But if you look at the model and you say, this is probably what the demand for concrete blocks will look like, we can save that as a pattern. We can call it something to remember it. And, picking a number here, somewhere in the realm of maybe 12,000 as a baseline. And then we can go to our other product and apply it. So if we go to forecasting and we say seasonality pattern, select the nails one, and then there you go. Your machine will give you a baseline forecast for what concrete blocks might look like. And you got to really look at this carefully and say, does this make a hell of a lot of sense or any sense at all, given what we know about the concrete block market, right? And so if you have, do you need to override it? Do you need to get do you need to cross-reference this with the previous framing that you've done, interviews with your customers, experts within the business? And I feel like I've forgotten something. Oh, and it's super important as new data comes in, right? So this is, I think in this example, we're here at March 2020, we're going to start selling concrete blocks. So it's super important to keep track of new data as it comes in and update the model, because as soon as you add a couple of extra data points, you should start trusting what's actually happening versus what you might have thought had happened, right? Great writers say, kill your darlings. I have had so many ideas about different models I've tried to implement and they weren't right. And I tried way too hard to make them work instead of listening to the market and having it tell me that what I thought was wrong. And I think that is it, actually. Yeah, so I think in terms of next steps, we hope that a couple of these have been useful. I sense that some of the questions in chat warrant deeper discussion because the answers should depend on a couple of other good questions that we should ask. But more generally, we hope you guys are able to sort of assess your threats, break them down into the probability of occurrence, and have a couple of different strategies and tactics you guys can implement in order to make those work for your own businesses. In the chat, I think, thank you, Josh. Josh has put in some further resources and case studies that you guys can use as resources. Streamline is created to help make your lives easier. And this deck and this recording will be sent to you guys. If you'd like to reach out to us and continue the conversations we were having, feel free to just click here, shoot me an email, and we can go from there. And so a couple of ones I think that were relevant based on what I saw from the target audience, the people who are signing up for the webinar, plus the topic of conversation. So some, what would you call it? Overarching trends of the supply chain industry, as well as, specifically leveraging digitalization as a foundation for a risk management strategy. I think both of these are great reads and particularly relevant to the problems that we talked about today. Alongside, the more general link that Josh provided, it links into other resources. So browse and have a look at what you'd like to see. And as I promised before, we've come to the end of the webinar. So Josh, if you wouldn't mind tossing up that second poll there. We'd love to get your opinion. And so this is not just single choice. This is multiple choice. You guys can select as many options as you like. What would you like to see a deeper or another webinar on based on the problems and the pain points you're experiencing with either your own business or clients' businesses today? And as people are answering that, feel free to jump in, ask questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. And we finished with, I think, 9 minutes to spare. So disconnected systems, classic. And I'd be more than happy to sort of share the poll results with the audience after the webinar. So thank you, everyone. Good luck.